The crystal spires of the Asterian royal palace caught the morning light of 3 distant suns, casting prismatic rainbows across the silver stone walls. Princess Zara Velthis pressed her face against the transparisteel window of her chambers, her violet eyes reflecting the dancing colors. At 19, she possessed the ethereal beauty of her people's silver-blue skin that seemed to shimmer with its own inner light, and long hair the color of deep amethyst that flowed like liquid starlight down her back. "Another perfect day in paradise," she murmured, her voice carrying a note of bitter irony. The formal gardens below stretched endlessly, every plant perfectly manicured, every path precisely laid. Beyond the outer walls, she could glimpse the wild forests that surrounded the capital city, untamed, mysterious, and absolutely forbidden to someone of her station. A soft chime announced the arrival of her daily tutors, and Zara sighed. Another day of diplomatic protocols, ancient histories, and marriage negotiations. Her father, Chief Valdric Velthis, ruled the Asterian Empire with wisdom and strength, but his love for his daughter often felt more like a gilded cage. Hours passed in a blur of lessons about trade agreements and cultural ceremonies. When her tutors finally departed for the midday meal, Zara made her decision. She had memorized the guard rotations, studied the ancient passages that honeycombed the palace walls. If she moved quickly and quietly, she could reach the forest before anyone noticed her absence. The hooded cloak she'd hidden in an old storage alcove fit perfectly over her ceremonial robes. The servant passages were dusty and narrow, but they led exactly where she needed to go. Her heart pounded with excitement as she slipped through a forgotten door that opened onto a service courtyard. From there, it was a simple matter of timing wait for the guard patrol to pass, then sprint across the open ground to the tree line. The moment she stepped into the forest, Zara felt as though she could breathe for the first time in years. The air was thick with unfamiliar scents, rich earth, blooming flowers she'd never seen, and an underlying wildness that made her skin tingle. Bioluminescent fungi dotted the tree trunks, pulsing with soft blue and green light. Strange bird creatures called from the canopy above, their songs unlike anything in the palace aviaries. She wandered deeper, enchanted by discovery after discovery. A stream that ran with water so clear it seemed like liquid crystal. Flowers that chimed like tiny bells when the wind moved through them. Insects with wings that scattered light like living prisms. The freedom was intoxicating, and she lost track of time completely. The attack came without warning. One moment she was examining a peculiar twisted tree whose bark seemed to shift colors in the changing light. The next she was face to face with something from her worst nightmares. The shadow beast stood nearly 8 feet tall, its form constantly shifting between solid matter and writhing darkness. 6 eyes blazed like crimson stars from a head that seemed to be made of living shadow, and when it opened its maw, she could see rows of teeth that gleamed like obsidian daggers. Zara's training kicked in the self-defense lessons her father had insisted upon despite her protests. She rolled to the side as massive claws swept through the air where she'd been standing, scoring deep gouges in the tree trunk behind her. But she was no warrior, and the beast was impossibly fast. Its next swipe caught her across the shoulder, shredding her cloak and drawing 3 parallel lines of silver blood across her skin. She stumbled backward, crying out in pain and terror, as the creature advanced for the killing blow. Its roar split the air like thunder, and she could smell its breath hot and metallic. Like molten copper dot then, impossibly, a figure burst from the undergrowth with a battle cry that was purely, unmistakably human. The young man who threw himself between Zara and the shadow beast was unlike anyone she'd ever seen. His skin was the warm tan of burnished gold, marked with scars that spoke of hard living. His hair was dark brown with sun-bleached streaks, hanging past his shoulders in an untamed cascade. He wore clothing cobbled together from various sources, tough leather pants that might have come from local animals, a vest that looked like it had been salvaged from some kind of crash, and boots held together with wire and determination. In his hands was a weapon that made her heart skip, a spear tipped with metal that gleamed like polished steel, clearly crafted with skill, but from salvaged materials. The young man moved with fluid grace as he thrust the spear at the shadow beast's flank, drawing a howl of rage from the creature. "Run, princess!" he shouted, not taking his eyes off the beast. "Get back to the city." The beast spun toward this new threat with lightning speed, massive claws raking across the young man's chest. Zara watched in horror as fabric parted and red blood, so different from her own silver, splattered across the forest floor. But instead of falling, the human twisted away and drove his spear deeper into the creature's side. "I said run." He grunted through gritted teeth, struggling to keep the writhing beast at bay. The shadow beast's jaws snapped forward, seeking his throat. The young man barely managed to get his arm up in time, crying out in pain as those terrible teeth sank deep into his flesh. But even wounded, he didn't let go of his weapon, using the creature's grip on his arm to drive the spear point up toward its heart. Beast released him with a shriek of rage and pain, dark ichor flowing from multiple wounds. It reared back, preparing for another attack, but the sound of approaching guards echoed through the forest. Energy weapon fire lit up the trees with brilliant flashes of blue light, and the shadow beast decided that discretion was the better part of valor. With one final roar of frustration, it melted back into the shadows and disappeared. Zara found herself suddenly alone with her rescuer as the royal guards burst into the clearing. The young man swayed on his feet, blood streaming from the deep puncture wounds on his arm and the parallel gashes across his chest. His face was pale beneath his tan, but his eyes, a startling green like spring leaves, remained alert and defiant. "You're hurt," she said, moving toward him despite the approaching guards. Her shoulder throbbed, but his injuries were far worse. "I've had worse," he replied, though his voice was tight with pain. Then, with a rueful smile that transformed his harsh features, "You should be more careful, Your Highness. The forest isn't a place for evening strolls. How did you know who I am?" He nodded toward her torn cloak, which had fallen away to reveal the intricate silver threading of her royal robes. Not many Asterians with violet hair running around the wilderness. Plus, you have that whole raised-in-luxury way of moving. Before she could respond, Captain Jorn and his guards surrounded them, weapons drawn but lowered now that the immediate threat had passed. The captain's scarred face was grim as he took in the scene, his princess injured and bleeding, accompanied by a human who looked like he'd been living rough for years. "Princess Zara," Captain Joran said, his tone carefully neutral. "Your father has been searching for you." We tracked the shadow beast's roar. His eyes moved to Marcus. "And you would be?" "Marcus," the young man replied, wincing as he tried to stem the bleeding from his arm. "Marcus Thorn." "He saved my life," Zara said quickly, seeing the suspicion in the guards' faces. "The shadow beast would have killed me if he hadn't intervened." Captain Joran nodded slowly. "Then you have our gratitude, Marcus Thorn. But I'm curious, what is a human doing living alone in these forests?" Marcus's jaw tightened. "My colony ship crashed here 3 years ago. I was the only survivor." "The Prometheus," Captain Joran said with sudden recognition. "We sent search parties, but found only wreckage. I was thrown clear during the crash. Spent 2 months unconscious in a cave system about 10 kilometers east of here. By the time I recovered enough to return to the wreck site, scavengers had picked it clean." Marcus's voice was matter-of-fact, but Zara could hear the old pain underneath. "I've been making do ever since." "Alone?" Zara's heart clenched at the thought. "You've been alone for 3 years?" Marcus shrugged his uninjured shoulder. "You adapt or you die. That's what survival means. You need medical attention," she said firmly. "Those wounds need proper treatment." Princess, Captain Joran said carefully, your father is waiting. He's been concerned about your absence. Zara lifted her chin in a gesture that was pure royal authority. Then we'll all return to the palace together. Marcus saved my life, Captain. He deserves our protection and care. As they made their way back through the forest, Zara found herself walking beside Marcus, despite the guards' attempts to maintain proper formation. She was fascinated by the way his eyes constantly moved, cataloging potential threats and escape routes. Every few steps, he would wince as his wounds pulled, but he never complained or asked them to slow down. What's it like? She asked quietly. Living free in the wild? Marcus glanced at her sideways. Free isn't the word I'd use. More like constantly terrified and frequently hungry. But there was something in his expression that suggested it wasn't entirely unpleasant. Though I admit, there are sights out here that would take your breath away. Show me, she said impulsively. I mean someday, when you're healed. Princess, Captain Joran began. I'm not asking permission, Captain, Zara replied coolly. I'm stating my intention. Marcus was staring at her with something like wonder. You're serious? I've spent my entire life behind walls, looking out at a world I'm not allowed to explore. Today, I finally took a step outside those walls, and yes, I nearly died. But I also felt truly alive for the first time. She met his green eyes directly. I won't go back to being a caged bird. They had reached the city walls, and Zara could see her father's distinctive figure waiting by the main gate. Chief Valdric Velphus was not a tall man by Asterian standards, but he possessed a presence that made him seem to fill whatever space he occupied. His silver-blue skin was marked with the ritual scars of leadership, and his violet hair was shot through with threads of silver. When his eyes found his daughter, relief and anger warred across his regal features. Zara, he said, his voice carefully controlled. Then his gaze fell on Marcus, taking in the human's injuries and improvised gear. And you must be the one who saved my daughter's life. Chief Valdric, Marcus said, inclining his head respectfully, but not bowing. I'm honored to meet you. The honor is mine, Valdric replied, surprising everyone present. Few would face a shadow beast to protect a stranger. Fewer still would survive such an encounter. He studied Marcus with the same intensity he brought to matters of state. What is your name, young Youngmin? Marcus Thorne, sir. My parents were colonists aboard the Prometheus, the research vessel that was lost in the Eastern Territories, Valdric said with recognition. We mourned the loss of all aboard. All but one, apparently, Marcus replied. Chief Valdric was silent for a long moment, his eyes moving between his daughter and the human who had saved her. Finally, he spoke. You're injured. Come, we'll tend to your wounds and discuss what happens next. As they entered the palace grounds, Zara felt a strange lightness in her chest. For the first time in her life, the future seemed full of possibilities she couldn't predict. And walking beside her, still bleeding but unbowed, was the young man who had changed everything with a single act of heroic courage. The crystal spires of the palace still caught the light, but somehow they no longer seemed like prison walls. The palace's healing chamber was unlike anything Marcus had ever seen. Soft blue light emanated from crystalline formations embedded in the walls, while a gentle humming filled the air, not mechanical, but somehow organic, as if the room itself were alive and breathing. He lay on what appeared to be a bed, carved from a single piece of luminescent stone, its surface somehow perfectly comfortable despite its mineral origin. Healer Nyx moved around him with practiced efficiency, her movements graceful and precise. Like all Asterians, her skin held that distinctive silver-blue shimmer, but hers was marked with intricate tattoos that seemed to pulse in rhythm with her heartbeat. Her hair was a deep indigo, braided with small crystals that chimed softly as she worked. Fascinating, she murmured, running a medical scanner over Marcus's wounds. The device projected holographic images of his injuries, showing them in layers of detail that made his head spin. Your cellular regeneration is remarkable. The shadow beast's venom should have paralyzed you within minutes. My father was a biologist, Marcus explained, gritting his teeth as she applied some kind of healing gel to his wounds. He made sure I understood the local flora and fauna. I've been building immunity to various toxins since I arrived. Deliberately? Nix's violet eyes widened. You exposed yourself to shadow beast venom intentionally. Small doses, extracted from their shed claws. It was either that or die the first time I encountered one. Marcus winced as the gel began to work, a strange tingling sensation spreading through his wounds. Knowledge is survival. Remarkable, she repeated, then glanced toward the chamber's entrance. And perfectly timed. Here comes the storm. The doors burst open to admit a heated argument between Zara and an elderly, Asterian male Marcus didn't recognize. The man's silver hair was elaborately braided in what Marcus was beginning to understand indicated high rank, and his robes were heavily decorated with symbols of office. Absolutely unprecedented. The man was saying, his voice rising with indignation. A human in the royal house? Father, surely you cannot be serious about this. Counselor Thane, Chief Valdric replied calmly, following them into the chamber. I am always serious about matters of honor and debt. Zara spotted Marcus and immediately moved to his side, her concern evident. How are you feeling? Healer Nix. Will he recover fully? His injuries are healing remarkably well, Princess, Nix replied diplomatically, though I recommend several days of rest before any strenuous activity. Several days during which we can reconsider this madness. Counselor Thane interjected, shooting a disapproving look at Marcus. Chief, with all respect, adopting an alien into the royal house will send exactly the message I intend, Valdric finished firmly. That honor and courage are valued in this house above birth or species. Marcus struggled to sit up, despite Nix's protests. Chief Valdric, I appreciate your gratitude, but Counselor Thane has a point. I don't want to cause political problems for your house. The only problem, Zara said hotly, is that some people value tradition over justice. Princess, Thane replied stiffly, tradition exists for good reason. The royal bloodline will be strengthened by adding someone who has proven his worth through actions rather than inheritance. A new voice interrupted. Lady Vera entered the chamber with the kind of presence that commanded attention. Marcus had heard Zara speak of her mentor, the woman who had helped raise her after her mother's death, serving as both teacher and confidant. Lady Vera was older than the others, her silver blue skin showing the elegant lines that marked advanced age among Asterians. Her violet hair had faded to lavender, but her eyes were sharp and intelligent. She moved with the confidence of someone who had spent decades navigating palace politics. Lady Vera, Thane said through gritted teeth, surely you cannot support this decision. On the contrary, she replied smoothly, approaching Marcus with interest. I've been reviewing the historical precedents. House Velthus has adopted promising individuals into the royal line 17 times in our recorded history. Admiral Kess was adopted from the merchant class. General Torvin was born a farmer's son. Both became legends. They were Asterian, Thane protested. And this young man is human, Vera replied. So what? He demonstrated more courage in one afternoon than most courtiers show in a lifetime. She studied Marcus with calculating eyes. Tell me, young Marcus, what do you know of our customs and laws? Very little, Marcus admitted honestly. I've learned some things from observation, but I've been focused more on basic survival than cultural studies. Honest, Vera noted approvingly. Thane, remember that honesty is supposedly one of our highest virtues. I still maintain this is unprecedented. Many things are unprecedented until they happen, Chief Valdric said, echoing words Marcus had heard him use before. The universe changes, counselor. We must change with it or be left behind. Zara moved closer to Marcus, her presence both comforting and confusing. He was acutely aware of how beautiful she was, the way the healing chamber's light played across her skin, how her violet hair caught the glow. But more than her beauty, it was her fierce loyalty that drew him. She was fighting for him when she barely knew him. There's another consideration, Healer Nix said quietly. The young man's biology is ... unique. His immune system, his healing rate, even his basic cellular structure shows adaptations I've never seen. He could provide invaluable insights into human physiology. I'm not a laboratory specimen, Marcus said, a edge creeping into his voice. No, Valdric agreed, you're not. You're a young man who saved my daughter's life at great personal risk. That makes you family, if you choose to accept the honor. The chamber fell silent. Marcus looked around at the assembled group, Thanes scowling with disapproval, Vera watching with calculating interest, Nix studying him like a fascinating puzzle, and Zara gazing at him with hope written across her features. And Chief Valdric, the most powerful man on the planet, offering to make a crashed colonist his son. Why? Marcus asked simply. I mean, I appreciate the gratitude, but this seems like more than just reward for one good deed. Valdric smiled, an expression that transformed his austere features. Because I see something in you that reminds me of myself at your age. The willingness to risk everything for what's right. The strength to survive when survival seems impossible. The wisdom to adapt without losing your core identity. He paused. And because Zara needs someone in her life who understands that freedom is worth fighting for. Marcus felt heat rise in his cheeks at the implication. Sir, I would never presume. To what? To care about my daughter? To be worthy of her friendship? Valdric's eyes twinkled with amusement. Marcus, you've already proven your worthiness. The question is whether you're brave enough to accept a new kind of challenge. What kind of challenge? Learning to be a prince, Zara said softly. Learning our customs, our politics, our way of life. Learning to fight with energy weapons instead of spears. Learning to navigate court intrigue instead of forest dangers. Learning to be part of a family, Valdric added gently. Marcus swallowed hard. The offer was overwhelming, the possibilities both thrilling and terrifying. But as he looked at Zara's hopeful face, he found his answer. I accept, he said quietly. If you truly think I can learn to be worthy of the honor, then from this day forward, Valdric proclaimed formally, you shall be known as Prince Marcus Thorn Velthus, adopted son of House Velthus, heir to its traditions and responsibilities. Counselor Thane sputtered in protest, but his objections were drowned out by Zara's delighted laugh. She threw her arms around Marcus, mindful of his injuries, and he felt something shift inside his chest, a warmth that had nothing to do with the healing chamber's effects. Welcome to the family, brother, she whispered, and Marcus tried to ignore the way the word brother seemed to stick in his throat. Over the following days, as Marcus healed and began his education in Asterian culture, he found himself caught between gratitude and a growing confusion. Chief Valdric had given him everything family, purpose, a future he'd never dared dream of. But spending time with Zara as her brother was proving more complicated than he'd anticipated. She was brilliant, funny, passionate about justice, and frustrated by the constraints of her position. She challenged him intellectually while teaching him the intricacies of palace life. When she laughed at his struggles with formal Asterian etiquette, her whole face lit up in a way that made his heart race. When she defended him against courtiers who still whispered about the human upstart, he felt a fierce protectiveness that went far beyond familial affection. The problem was becoming clearer every day. He was falling in love with his adopted sister, the princess who had saved him by bringing him into her family. And judging by the way she sometimes looked at him when she thought he wasn't watching, The way she found excuses to touch his hand or stand close to him, she might be developing similar feelings. It was a complication neither of them could afford, and one that threatened everything Chief Valdric had given him. But as Marcus lay in his new chambers on his first night as a prince, staring up at the crystal ceiling that reflected the light of 3 distant suns, he couldn't bring himself to regret the path that had led him here, even if it meant his heart was about to be torn in two. 5 years had transformed the scrawny human survivor into something extraordinary. Prince Marcus Thornvelthus stood at the edge of the palace's grand balcony, his broad shoulders silhouetted against the twilight sky of Asteria Prime. At 26, he had grown into his frame with impressive results, tall and powerfully built. His sun-touched skin, now bearing the ritual scars of Asterian warriorhood alongside the faded marks from his first encounter with the shadow beast. His dark hair, now properly groomed, but still maintaining its unruly waves, caught the light of the 3 setting suns. He wore the formal robes of a royal prince, deep purple, trimmed with silver, but somehow he made the ceremonial garments look natural rather than costume-like. The crude spear had been replaced with an elegant energy blade at his side, though those who knew him understood he could still craft weapons from nothing if necessary. Brooding again? Princess Zara's voice carried a note of gentle teasing as she joined him on the balcony. At 24, she had blossomed into the most sought-after woman in the Asterian Empire. Her silver-blue skin seemed to glow with inner light, and her violet hair had deepened to the color of twilight itself, flowing in an intricate braid adorned with crystals that sparkled like captured starlight. She moved with the fluid grace of a trained warrior. Marcus had insisted on teaching her real combat skills, not the ceremonial sword work considered appropriate for princesses. The result was a woman who could discuss diplomatic treaties one moment and disarm an opponent the next. Thinking, Marcus corrected, not turning from his contemplation of the city spread below them. "There's a difference." "About the announcement?" She moved to stand beside him, close enough that he could catch the subtle fragrance she wore something. That reminded him of night blooming, flowers in the wild forest where they'd first met, among other things. His jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. The announcement in question had been made that morning. Princess Zara's formal engagement to Prince Davin of House Corinth, one of the most powerful noble families in the empire. The marriage would unite 2 great houses and strengthen the empire's political foundations. It was a brilliant match by every political measure. Prince Davin was handsome in the classical Asterian way, tall and elegant, with the silver skin and violet hair that marked the old bloodlines. He was intelligent, well-educated, and by all accounts a decent man who would treat Zara with respect and affection. Marcus wanted to hate him and found he couldn't. That somehow made everything worse. "The council is pleased," Zara said carefully. "Father believes it will stabilize the outer territories." "And what do you believe?" Marcus asked, finally turning to look at her. The movement brought them face to face, close enough to see the conflict in her violet eyes. "I believe duty sometimes requires personal sacrifice," she replied, but her voice lacked conviction. They stood in silence for a moment, the weight of unspoken words hanging between them. Over the past 5 years, their relationship had evolved into something neither could easily define. Officially, they were siblings, the adopted prince and the royal daughter. Publicly, they were the closest of friends and allies. Privately, privately, they were 2 people desperately in love who could never admit it. "There's other news," Zara said, clearly trying to change the subject. "Ambassador Kess arrived this afternoon with information about the Outer Rim colonies." Marcus straightened with interest. Ambassador Kess was one of the few government officials who had embraced his inclusion in the royal family from the beginning, partly because she understood the value of diversity in leadership. "What kind of information?" "Human settlements. 3 colonies, all established within the past decade. They've been making contact with various species, establishing trade relationships. She paused. One of them specifically requested information about any human survivors from the film. Prometheus. The words hit Marcus like a physical blow. For 5 years, he had believed himself to be the only human in this sector of the galaxy. The possibility that there were others people from his own species, perhaps even people who had known his parents, was overwhelming. They're looking for you, Zara continued softly. Or looking for information about what happened to the research mission. Do you think I should make contact? Marcus asked, though part of him already knew the answer. I think you deserve to know where you come from, Zara replied. And they deserve to know what happened to their people. Another silence fell between them, this one heavy with implications. If Marcus made contact with the human colonies, it would open possibilities that had never existed before. He could learn about his heritage, meet others of his kind, perhaps even find a place where he truly belonged, instead of always being the alien. Prince in an Asterian court. He could find someone to love who wouldn't be forbidden to him. The engagement. Ball is tomorrow night, Zara said suddenly. The whole court will be there to celebrate my upcoming marriage to Prince Davin. I know. Marcus's hands tightened on the balcony railing. I'll be there, of course. Wouldn't want to miss such a joyous occasion. The bitterness in his voice made her wince. Marcus, I should go, he said abruptly, pushing away from the railing. Captain Joran wanted to review security protocols for tomorrow's event, but as he started to leave, Zara caught his arm. The touch sent electricity through both of them, and for a moment they stood frozen, her hand on his skin, his eyes locked with hers. I never asked for this, she whispered. I know. His voice was rough with emotion. Neither of us did. For a heartbeat, they leaned toward each other, drawn by 5 years of suppressed longing. Then Marcus stepped back, gently but firmly removing her hand from his arm. I can't, he said quietly. You're my sister. You're going to marry a good man who can give you the life you deserve. And I'm going to be happy for you, because that's what family does. He walked away before she could respond, leaving Zara alone on the balcony with tears she couldn't shed and words she couldn't say. The engagement ball was a spectacular affair. The palace's great hall had been transformed into a wonderland of light and color, with floating crystal formations casting rainbow patterns across the walls. The most powerful nobles in the empire had come to witness the official announcement, their elaborate costumes a dazzling display of wealth and status. Prince Davin looked every inch the perfect royal bridegroom. His silver skin was marked with the ritual scars of a warrior, and his violet hair was braided with threads of gold. When he took Zara's hand for the ceremonial dance, they looked like something out of a fairy tale too beautiful, Asterians whose union would bring prosperity to their people. Marcus watched from his position near the throne, maintaining the pleasant expression expected of a royal prince, while his heart quietly broke. He had perfected the art of looking happy at court functions over the past 5 years, but tonight the mask felt heavier than usual. You're not fooling anyone, you know, Lady Vera said quietly, moving to stand beside him. Now in her advanced years, she had become even more direct in her observations. I don't know what you mean, Marcus replied, not taking his eyes off the dancing couple. Of course you don't. Vera's tone was dry. Just as she doesn't know why she keeps looking over here, instead of gazing adoringly at her handsome fiancé. Marcus's jaw tightened, but he said nothing. Vera was right. Zara's eyes found his repeatedly throughout the evening, and each glance felt like a dagger to his chest. There are options, Vera continued conversationally. The human colonies, for instance. A chance to explore your heritage, perhaps find someone more suitable to your situation. Is that your advice? Run away? My advice is to consider what's best for everyone involved, including her. Vera nodded toward Zara, who was now engaged in animated conversation with several diplomatic wives, while Prince Davin spoke with their husbands. She deserves to marry someone who can love her without reservation. And you deserve to find happiness somewhere it's actually possible. Before Marcus could respond, a commotion near the main entrance caught his attention. Ambassador Kess had arrived, but she wasn't alone. A group of strangers accompanied her tall, pale-skinned beings with an otherworldly grace that immediately identified them as non-Asterian. The celestial delegation, Vera murmured. They weren't expected until next week. Chief Valdric moved smoothly to greet the unexpected guests, his diplomatic smile firmly in place. But Marcus noticed the tension in his adopted father's shoulders, the careful way he positioned himself between the newcomers and the rest of the court. The lead delegate was a woman of striking beauty, her skin pale as starlight, and her hair a cascade of silver that seemed to move with its own ethereal wind. When she spoke, her voice carried a musical quality that made everyone in the hall turn to listen. "Chief Valdric," she said with a formal bow that somehow managed to convey both respect and superiority, "we apologize for the unexpected arrival, but urgent matters require immediate attention." "Of course," Valdric replied smoothly. "May I present my daughter, Princess Zara, and her betrothed, Prince Davin of House Corinth, and my son, Prince Marcus." The delegate's eyes found Marcus with unsettling intensity, and he felt a chill run down his spine. There was something predatory in her gaze, something that reminded him of the shadow beasts in the forest. "Fascinating," she said softly. "The human prince. We have heard such interesting stories about you, young Marcus. All greatly exaggerated." "I'm sure," Marcus replied carefully, falling back on his diplomatic training. "Perhaps, perhaps not." The delegate smiled, revealing teeth that seemed just slightly too sharp. "We shall have to discuss this further. But first, we bring news that affects your entire empire." She turned back to Chief Valdric, and Marcus noticed that the entire hall had fallen silent, everyone straining to hear what the Celestials had come to announce. "The Void Hunters have returned to this sector," the delegate said simply. The word sent a wave of shock through the assembled nobles. Marcus had learned enough history to understand the implications. The Void Hunters were an ancient enemy, creatures of living darkness that consumed entire civilizations before vanishing back into deep space. They hadn't been seen in this part of the galaxy for over a century. "Are you certain?" Valdric asked, his diplomatic composure cracking slightly. "Our deep space monitors detected their signature ships 3 days ago. They are still distant, but their trajectory is clear. They are coming for Asteria Prime." The hall erupted in concerned murmurs and frightened whispers. But Marcus barely heard them, because his attention was fixed on the celestial delegate's face. There was something in her expression, a satisfaction that didn't match her dire announcement. And when her eyes met his again, he saw something that made his blood run cold. Recognition. Not surprise at meeting the human prince, but recognition, as if she had been looking for him specifically. The engagement ball had just become something much more dangerous, and Marcus had the growing suspicion that his presence at the palace had somehow drawn this threat to the people he loved. The 3 sons of Asteria Prime were setting as the last guests departed, but Marcus's real challenges were just beginning.